So as we're diving into those common perpetrators, as I mentioned last time, what we're going to start with in this series, and by no means are any of these more important than the others, this is perhaps just the most common: simple carbohydrates. You've heard about high carb, low carb diets. Let's try to break that down a little bit so it makes some more sense. So as we talk about simple carbohydrates today, the fancy word is hyperinsulinemia. We all go through hyperinsulinemia. You eat a bunch of Halloween candy or whatever, and you're going to go into hyperinsulinemia for a while. But then your body will balance it out and regulate it back out. So we're designed to take hits here and there, right? God knew that there were going to be times where we were going to be walking out in the forest and we were going to come across, a berry bush. And we were going to eat every freaking berry on there until we had diarrhea and maybe even threw up, right? You know what I'm saying? Until our fingers were purple. Knew that we were going to do that. Okay? And we can take those kind of hits, but we can't take them constantly. So I find it quite interesting that fruit in a natural environment is not available 365 days out of a year. Right? We're designed to take those hits at certain times. Certain fruits are ripe and ready early spring. Makes sense. Many creatures are coming out of hibernation. They need to start putting some pounds back on. And then the other fruits are available just before what? Just before we go into winter. Right? And in tropical areas, the fruits that are available year-round are actually some of the most healthful fruits. And some of the least damaging fruits. Like if you've had a real plantain versus a Chiquita banana, there's a big difference in them, yeah? They're not as sweet. They're much more almost like a potato, yeah? Okay, so here's the problem with this, is whenever we eat simple carbohydrates, sugar, right? That would be the simplest one, just table sugar. Whenever we eat any sugars, as we swallow it, it instantaneously, as it gets absorbed into the bloodstream, the first place it goes is the liver. Why? Because if you circulate too much glucose through your bloodstream, we call that diabetes, right? That's a diabetic crisis. And you can actually die within moments. Within moments.
If you have too much.
If you have too much. Now people go, no man, you see some of these type 2 diabetes, they're running like 400 plus and they still function. You know why? Because it took decades for them to get there. And their body has kind of figured out different ways to try to adapt to that. Usually by that stage, quite poorly, yeah?
Yeah.
Quite poorly, but they still live. But they ain't thriving, yeah? All right, so what our liver has to do is it has to convert these sugars into fats. And it does it in the liver. Triglycerides and cholesterol are made from sugar, not fat. So if you want to lower your cholesterol or your triglycerides, the primary way you can do it, now it's not the only way, the primary way you do it is eliminate sugars. Now, when I say sugar, most people go, yeah, I get that. Man, I had a friend of mine who had bladder cancer in his 40s. Unusual for a man in his 40s. Right? And praise God, the medical system, we have surgeons that knew how to make an artificial bladder out of part of his lower intestine. Okay? Cool.
Yeah.
Right? However, as we explored this, I told him some of these things, and he knew it, and he just kind of, he's a friend, so he blows me off, right? Because he's a friend. It's all right. I love him still. He loves me still, even though I'm opinionated and all that. But he goes, Ken, I realized how much sugar I was eating. He goes, because I like sweet tea. He works construction, and he would always buy the sweet teas over at McDonald's because it's $1 for a big, huge, mega thing of it. And he goes, and I took a thermos of sweet tea. He goes, so what I decided to do is I'm not going to buy any more out on the road. I'm going to make my own so I can pay attention to how much sugar I'm doing. He goes, so I decided I'm just going to do an experiment. I'm not going to judge it. I'm just going to be me. He goes, what I did was I put a jar next to where I make my tea. And he goes, and every time I put a teaspoon in my cup, I put a teaspoon in the jar. He goes, what I discovered was I was eating 5 to 8 pounds of refined sugar a month just in my tea. And yet we give our kids Jamba Juice and sodas and mochas and pumpkin spice lattes. And when you add it all up, the average American is consuming 160 pounds of refined sugar a year. That's average. So you get the people that are more fitness conscious, maybe they're doing what we used to do just 100 years ago. The average was 14 pounds per year. That was average. So there's some people who are still doing that, which means some people are eating like 300 pounds of refined sugar a year. And they don't understand. I don't understand why my joints hurt. And I don't understand why I got cardiovascular disease. I don't know why I got type 2 diabetes. It runs in my family. It's like, right, what's that, Ron White? Here's your sign. But just so you know, even healthy people can do this. You ever seen an obese vegan? I have. Lots of them. Diabetes, heart disease, whole bit. And you're going, man, they're vegans. They're carbaholics. They're carbaholics. They like their bread, man. They like their pasta. They make all this. And here, it turns sugar. As soon as you chew it, you've got an enzyme in your mouth called salivary amylase. Turns it instantly into sugar. You swallow it. Liver has to process it, just like you had the Coca-Cola. Diabetics know this. A bowl of vanilla ice cream has less glycemic load than a boiled potato. Mm-hmm. But if you said which one's healthier, what would people say? The potato. Mm-hmm. Right? But that's not actually true. What I would say is neither one is really good for you. Certainly not if you're already damaged. Right? If you're already damaged. That's all I'm going to say on carbohydrates. That's all you need to know, really. You can go into all kinds of funky details and gymnastics, and if you want more detail, it's really easy. Here's what you Google. Glycemic index versus glycemic load. Mm-hmm. Okay? So you might even write that down to share with a friend. Because different foods react differently. Their index, meaning the total amount of sugars in them, if I stuck them in a test tube, is different than how it affects you in your body. The difference between the baked potato is its glycemic index is lower, but its load is higher. It's all starch. It's all sugar. Boom. By the way, so is bread.
Yes.
All grain products. Mm-hmm. All grain products is basically like the baked potato. It's primarily sugar. Okay? All right. Bioaccumulation. Now when I do our toxicity class and when we do the 21-day cleanse purification program, we'll be talking about bioaccumulation, biomagnification. Okay? Bioaccumulation means, you guys, this. Every hit you take sticks with you forever. Nobody heals from or recovers from a concussion. They might heal, but they're going to heal with scar tissue. And each concussion will limit their brain function later in life to some percentage. Maybe it's 1% and you wouldn't know it because they're not using that part of their brain much anyway. Like most people who vote nowadays. Certainly here in California. All right? But, you may not notice it, but every hit matters. And this is why I try to tell patients this. Is like, look, you're not getting old. You're getting older. So it's not how many calendar pages you turn, Rose. It's what you wrote on those pages. Like, what happened? When you're 19 and you've only had like maybe a half dozen really solid hits, like if you're like a hyperactive kid like I was, you know, you maybe have half dozen really good hard hits and maybe a dozen, you know, significant enough to make you pause. But imagine what that's like by the time you're 40. You've had double them. So you got more scar tissue in those joints, and the tissues that are already injured, are they easier or harder to injure later?
I would say easier.
Easier.
They're weak.
So they build up. Right, they're not quite as robust and resilient as they once were. Right? I won't say they're weak. We're freaking durable. Human beings we are for sure the most adaptive mammals, at least on the planet as far as I know. Maybe raccoons, I don't know, but yeah. So bioaccumulation also, when we're talking about chemistry, is what goes in doesn't always come out. Right? When we put that sugar in, if we peed and pooed out sugar, right? They would go, whoa, you're in a crisis. We need to get you on metformin and insulin. Yeah. So where'd all that sugar go from the birthday cake and the ice cream we had the other night? If it didn't come out. It accumulates in our body in the forms of fats. Right? In forms of fats. And that's true of a lot of poisons too. A lot of the medications we use. Anybody know somebody who's taking antidepressants? Like they tell you, like you start, they go, look, don't expect any real results from these for a few weeks. Why? Because you have to build up a saturation level. Mm-hmm. So we already know that about meds. Right? You got to saturate your tissues with it. And then what do they tell you when they come off? Don't just quit cold turkey. Why? Because we got to lower you back down. So that's true of a lot of chemicals that we get experienced with in our lives. You have to appreciate that this stuff builds up in our bodies, and some people go, man, I tried to quit and then I felt like crap and I started to cleanse and I feel like crap and screw it, I don't want to do it. And you're like, man, I'm sorry, but the only way you're going to get it out is you got to stop putting the stuff in. It's the only way. You got to stop drilling the holes. Okay? So I always tell patients when they start here, my goal for you is to get you off of all of your meds. All of them. Even the ones you buy over the counter. My goal is to get you off all your meds. If we can't get that goal, then my goal is to get you off as many as possible. And if we can't get that goal, I want to get those down to the lowest possible dose. Right? Just enough to take the edge off, because stupid is supposed to hurt. Right? That's called wisdom. That's called wisdom. It's like you want to just take the edge off, not enough to totally obliterate the pain, whatever your pain may be. You don't want to totally obliterate it, because then you won't contend with it. Right? You'll leave it there. So sometimes we'll even say to patients, Dr. Castrojohn and myself, I was like, look, if I started adjusting you and I got rid of all your pain, but left the original problem unchanged, would you feel that was a better deal than if you stayed in the same pain, but we could irrefutably show that we're reversing the disease process within? Which would you rather?
Where's the disease?
Right, that's not such an easy question to answer. It's not. I know it's not. I'm a consumer also. I ache in pain too. Mentally, emotionally, structurally, chemically, right? I struggle too. But you got to have that come to Jesus meaning. Right? It's got to be that like pool of Bethesda thing where you say, hey, do you want to be healed or do you want to be whole? Because if you want to be whole, it's going to take action. You got to pick up your own mat. Right? I can't do it for you. I can give you directions. Pick up your mat, go home. But I can't do it for you. Make sense?